How's it, young Stashes? Today we continue with Communist China and its foreign relations, as well as how it has come to establish itself as a global superpower. As we saw earlier, Communist China's relationship with the US was sour almost from the very beginning. The involvement of the PRC in the Korean War after the US intervened led to flaring up of tensions between the two countries. For decades, the US refused to recognize the CCP as the legitimate Chinese government. Instead, the US supported the Taiwanese government, the Republic of China, as the only legitimate Chinese government and actually blocked the PRC's membership in the United Nations. But following the Sino-Soviet split, which we covered last week, as well as the ending of American involvement in the Vietnam War, a complete policy reversal was initiated with US President Richard Nixon's historic 1972 visit to China.
We were the first Americans to visit the land of China in like a million years or something like that.
This came as a shock to many, and eventually led to the formal establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the USA on the 1st of January 1979, recognizing the communist government as the only legitimate government of China.
Somebody said world peace was in our hands, but all I did was play ping pong.
However, the US did not stop its military support of Taiwan, which is a major bone of contention between China and the USA to this day. Tibet and China have had a very tense relationship since Communist China invaded Tibet in 1950. After the Chinese invasion, the Tibetan government initially recognized Tibet as non-independent in 1951, but this was done while they had guns pointed at their heads.
It's hard to think with this double barrel in my face.
Sorry.
In any event, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan Buddhists and head of state, the Dalai Lama, did not grant Tibetan government representatives the power to do so. However, China argues that its authority over Tibet originates in the 13th century. But both Tibet and China were under Mongolian rule during this time, so that argument doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense.
The Tibetans revolted in 1959 against Chinese communist rule, but the revolution was brutally put down and the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government fled into exile to India. To this day, tensions between Tibet and China are high. The conflict led to the creation of the Free Tibet movement, amid growing calls to recognize the authority of the Tibetan government in exile as the legitimate government of Tibet. The conflict between Tibet and China got so bad it even came to us here in South Africa. In 2011, the South African government denied the Dalai Lama a South African visa when he wanted to come visit his good friend Archbishop Desmond Tutu for his 80th birthday. It came out that the South African government had denied his visa because they didn't want to anger the Chinese government, who were becoming South Africa's major trade partner. Despite the South African court declaring that the South African government's actions were unlawful, they denied the visa again in 2014. This kind of interference in the foreign relations of a sovereign country like South Africa is just another example of how the Chinese government disrupts and silences their opponents. China and India have historically maintained peaceful relations for thousands of years of recorded history, but the harmony of their relationship has varied in modern times. The two nations have sought economic cooperation with each other, while frequent border disputes and economic nationalism in both countries are major points of contention. Some of these border disputes resulted in 3 military conflicts: the Sino-Indian War of 1962, the border clashes in Natu La, Chola in 1967, and the 1987 Somderong-Chu standoff. Since the late 1980s, both countries have successfully rebuilt diplomatic and economic ties. But since 2013, border disputes have re-emerged to take center stage in the two countries' mutual relations. The PRC sees self-ruled Taiwan as a breakaway province that will eventually come under Communist China's control and has threatened the use of force to take the island. But Taiwan sees itself as distinct from the Chinese mainland, with its own constitution and democratically elected leaders.
All made in Taiwan!
When the Communists won in 1949, Chiang Kai-shek and his nationalists, known as the Kuomintang or KMT, fled to Taiwan, where they ruled for several decades. They called this the Republic of China, a name Taiwan has retained. Today, only 12 countries, plus the Vatican, officially recognize Taiwan. The US decision to recognize the Communist government of China as the legitimate government in 1979 was a significant turning point, and a richer, more powerful China today exerts pressure so more countries do not recognize Taiwan or lend its support. But America remains Taiwan's strongest ally, selling arms and promising to help in case of a Chinese attack. Communist China has spoken of peaceful reunification, a long-term goal to win over the island's population through soft power and CCP-sponsored messaging that shows unification in a positive light.
Absolutely.
But Communist China has also used threats.
Here I come. Here I come.
President Xi Jinping has said reunification with the island must be fulfilled and is believed to have a deadline. In a military confrontation, Taiwan's armed forces would be no match for the Chinese army in terms of numbers. But the Chinese are wary that if they do attack, then the US will certainly intervene to protect Taiwan. Even today, this could lead to a nuclear standoff, which nobody wants.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Mao Zedong died on the 9th of September 1976, remaining as chairman of the Communist Party until his death. By this time, China was a major player on the world stage. In 1967, the Chinese had tested their first hydrogen bomb, making them a nuclear power. They had a huge military presence that was respected and feared. The Chinese were also considered by other major superpowers when analyzing their own influence in Asia. China was a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and was treated as an important nation in terms of diplomacy by the US and the USSR. Economically, China had been transformed under Mao's leadership. But as we saw, this had come at a massive price. However, the aim was to make a massive change to the way that the economy worked. According to official sources, China was virtually self-sufficient by the time that Mao died. It didn't have to rely on imports of goods from other countries. The economy functioned as intended. This did mean that there was little emphasis on the production of comfort goods, though that had not been the intention. Most countries, including the world superpowers, were accumulating huge debts. China did not. Chinese industry was, however, technologically behind its Western counterparts. Land reform policies were also visible in the agricultural sector. China would be crippled if there was a crop failure and would then be reliant on imported food. But China didn't need to make use of imports. Indeed, it rejected offers of foreign aid after natural disasters. This was partly for political reasons, obviously, but also because it felt it could manage without any assistance. Militarily, the Chinese had proven themselves on several occasions. The Chinese actions by both the communists and nationalists in World War II had shown that they could withstand attacks from technologically advanced forces. In 1950, the Chinese People's Liberation Army was involved in the Korean War and held back assaults backed by US forces. The leading powers were well aware of the military strength of China and its limitations. The limitations were that the armed forces, whilst large, were not particularly well trained. The Maoist method was to have all soldiers as equals. This removed the typical command structure. This led to a lack of specialism and training deficiencies. Globally, the PRC didn't particularly seek to exert its authority. It did not have particularly good relations with other communist states, at one time only recognizing Albania as being the other true socialist nation. Her relations with the USA did improve in the 1970s, and the thawing of attitudes led to involvement in world affairs via the United Nations. Mao's vision of a socialist state had been exported to other parts of the world, including Africa and Asia. But this vision often led to disastrous consequences in these countries. Despite the challenges and controversies, China had undergone unprecedented economic growth and development. Today, the PRC has the second largest economy in the world after the US, and as such, it's consolidating its position as a world superpower. But is China's powerful position a good thing? Their vast economic reforms of opening up the market has been truly beneficial to China as well as the rest of the world. But being trade partners with China does have its price. For example, in Africa, there have been criticisms of Chinese investments. These include accusations of trapping African countries into years of debt, leading to the Chinese government owning local key points like ports and airports. Also, many of these countries have become economically dependent on China, which leads to the prioritization of Chinese interests over local needs. There have also been accusations of increased corruption in Africa, bribery, and unfair business practices to secure business transactions. Recently, China was able to open its first overseas military base in the small African country of Djibouti, in exchange for major investments, preferential loans, a pipeline, and 2 airports. It's unclear whether the benefits of this partnership with China will outweigh the concerns, but it must be remembered that China doesn't have a great human rights track record, and giving them too much autonomy in Africa could lead to a new brand of colonialism.
Don't scare me like that, colonizer.
Similarly, China is now at the forefront of a potential new Cold War, with its tacit support of Russia in the Ukraine war, while renewing its interest of invading Taiwan. One thing is for sure, China has come very far since the days of Mao and the Great Leap Forward. The West will do well not to underestimate the threat that China poses today, because that threat is already here. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, from Stashy and myself, stay Stashy.